Hey, good morning and welcome to everyone. My name is Kelly Christian. I'm on the leadership team here at NEASC. We're so glad to have you join us for another NEASC Forum. Today, we're going to be discussing building relationships with diverse students, supporting students of color in your schools and learning communities. We're very pleased to be co-presenting today's webinar with one of our partners, the New England League of Middle Schools. And their executive director, Jeff Rodman, is going to share a little bit more about that organization in just a moment.
Good day, everyone, and welcome. I am Jeff Rodman, the executive director of the New England League of Middle Schools. And for 49 years, the New England League of Middle Schools has been a leader in promoting middle-level best practices by providing collaborative learning experiences that support students' intellectual, academic, social, and emotional growth and success. Our reach extends actually beyond New England, with memberships that includes more than 250 schools supporting nearly 8,000 middle-level educators. NELMS is truly excited to be working with the New England Association of Schools and Colleges to bring you today's important and essential forum, Building Relationships with Diverse Students. It is an honor and privilege for me to introduce our two outstanding presenters and practitioners, Vilenti Tulloch and Dr. Timothy Allen. Vilenti is the CEO and founder of Academic Leadership Association, and Tim is an associate professor of education at American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts. Tim is also the assistant executive director of the New England League of Middle Schools and a former middle school principal. At this time, to share with you, I introduce Vilenti and Tim. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So excited to be here with you this morning and working through a really important and timely topic that Vilenti and I are both very passionate about. So as Jeff said, I'm Tim Allen. I'm a professor of education at AIC in Springfield, Massachusetts, also the assistant executive director of NELMS. And for the past 20 years, I've been working mainly in middle schools, including schools in New York City, Boston, and Western Massachusetts. For the past 12 years, up until this year, I was a middle school principal, and I absolutely loved that young adolescent age. But now that I'm a professor of education, I'm loving sort of preparing students to teach high school, to teach middle school, to teach elementary, to be counselors, to find their way to having an impact on our youth. So really excited to be here, excited to talk about this topic. And Vilenti, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Vilenti Tulloch, just a little bit about me. I worked first as a social worker in human services, and before my transition into education, I worked as a classroom teacher, adjustment counselor, dean of students, and culture and climate associate. I now run a program called the Academic Leadership Association, where we actually were the NAACP award recipient for our work in the community. It's really our mission to empower youth to make positive changes within themselves and their school communities through mentoring and advocacy. This is done through school-based leadership programs and professional development for educators. So we're really happy to be here and really excited to share this wealth of information with you all. So thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things that Vilenti and I brings us to this work is that we had very different, in many ways, very different school experiences. And that, sort of drives our passion for this. So for me, I went to a bunch of different kinds of school. I went to a small Catholic school. I went to big city elementary and middle school. And then I went to a small suburban high school. So I really had three different experiences. But one thing that, unfairly or fairly, one thing that always happened for me is I always felt supported at school, even through these three totally different environments, and that's the experience everyone should have. That's the experience that school should be. It didn't matter if I was in a small Catholic school or a big city school or a medium-sized suburban school. All three of these places felt like home to me. They felt like a place where I mattered. They felt like a place where I was nurtured and able to succeed. And that was a real blessing in my life, but that's not the experience for all of our students, and certainly not the experience for many of our diverse students, unfortunately. So I felt like an insider at school. And, Vilenti's experience was a little different, right? Right, Valent?
Listen, so I'm glad you had that experience. It was a little different for me, right? My closest friends would change a lot. I spent a lot of time really underperforming and a lot of time in the principal's office. So I never really had someone who, really took a real like deep connection, formed a great relationship with me over the entire experience that I had. And it was almost like it was left for someone else to do it. Uh, but in school, that person never came for me. So, there's even moments where like my brother and I would, after school, would spend time in that community. That school district again, diversity, but we would be out with our friends and, in that community and, they would contact people like the neighbors and the community individuals would call the school and say, hey, like, there's some students that are roaming around, outside of school. And it really didn't have, things like that. Those situations really didn't create a sense of belonging in that school district for us. So a little bit different for us.
So that sort of shapes a lot of our work. Is I felt like an insider at school most of the time, and Valenti often felt sort of like an outsider at school. And so our work is about how to change that for everyone. So before we move on, I just want to throw a question out there, and if you could type some responses in the chat. We want you to think back to your time in school. Did you feel like an insider or did you feel like an outsider at school? And whichever one you felt like, describe how, describe why. Were you an insider or an outsider during your school experience? And while you're typing your responses, Valenti, maybe you could tell us about a specific adult that actually did make you feel like more of an insider at school. Was there an adult that had an impact on you?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a substitute teacher in fifth grade one day. I think she was filling in for our math teacher. And she had been on the school campus, here and there, and I would run into her. We never really spoke, but this one day I walked into class and, we were in the back of the class and we were just, really being disruptive. And so she pulled me aside and really had a conversation. And she really, not just like reprimanded me in a way, but like also showed that she really cared about me and she took a liking to me and she looked like me. She was an African American woman and that was the first time I actually seen that, right? As a teacher. So that conversation really stuck with me and uh every time I ran into her for the rest of the school year, I acted a little different, right? I really held myself to a higher standard because I didn't want to let her down because I knew that she was watching and she was looking out for me. So that was really important for me. It made me feel like an insider for that, uh, you know, for that year.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story, Valenti. And there's some cool stuff in the chat. One couple of things I noticed. One, someone was talking about their experience as an LGBTQ plus student and how that made them feel like an outsider often at school. And we want you to know that this training we're going to go through today, we focus on students of color, but we use the word diverse even more often because this really is about any students that would be classified as diverse in your school. And all of these strategies we're going to go through will really work with any sort of diverse students for the most part. Another word I saw someone use was noticed. They talked about a teacher making them feel noticed. And I think that's a really important concept. We're going to use a lot of different words: belonging, mattering. I think noticed is another great way to say it. And lastly, I noticed a lot of people were saying like, at first I felt like an insider, then this happened and I felt like an outsider, then this happened and I felt like an insider. And I think that's very, very true and very, very possible. I had the privilege of feeling like an insider the whole time. I was a white cisgender male. I was pretty well behaved enough, so it just felt like school was kind of built for me. And that's a privilege that I hadn't earned. It was a privilege I was just given. But great responses in the chat. I can tell this is going to be a fun group to work with, Valenti. So we're going to start to share our slides and start to go through some of our content. And we'll be asking more questions like that along the way. So please stay up in that chat. And so we like to put this up to start. And here in American schools, we're talking a lot about equity at the moment and for the last few years. And, you know, for a long time, there was talk of equality, making sure everybody gets equal. And that would be the picture here on the left. But obviously, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this graphic. I just think it really centers our work when it comes to equity. But obviously, if everybody gets the same, if you look at the picture on the left, the guy on the far left has the greatest view of all time, and the kid on the far right still can't see, right? So what equity is and what American schools are going for is giving every kid exactly what they need to be able to see past their barriers, to be able to get on the playing field, to be able to achieve academically and socially and emotionally. So a lot of what we talk today is about equity and giving students exactly what they need to succeed.
Yeah, and Tim, this really starts with relationships, right? We build this equity through our relationships with our students, because we understand that positive relationships open up pathways to learning for our kiddos. We also understand that students don't learn from it, you know, teachers and educators that they don't like, right? It's really hard to get them to want to, you know, engage academically if they really don't have that relationship with you and a sense of safety. And, you know, oftentimes students mirror the behaviors of the adults in their lives. So, and that's really get to start to form their social skills along with their peers.
Yeah, so that brings us to this concentric circle. And I wanna remind us that, again, we focus on students of color. But when we're providing equity, all of our diverse students need different things for that equity, right? So the relationships really matter to the students who might feel like outsiders at school. I just felt like the relationships were always there, right? And that's not the case for a lot of our diverse students. So whatever diversity means at your school, a lot of these practices are going to pertain to you, which brings us to sort of the overview of our framework, which Vilenti will explain here. This is our concentric circle model, which really breaks down how we see this work.
Yeah, Tim, and I really love this visual because it really kind of paints the picture for us, right? So in order to get to the core of this work, we really have to build solid connections with our students, right? You know, that's where it starts. To have that relationship with students, build that trust. And then we build a community around our students, and that's through aesthetics in our classrooms or in the school building, you know, through different talk structures and classroom rituals and routines that we provide for our students that we'll get to later in this presentation. And that's where we can get to the real core of this work, which is solidarity. And that's working, you know, alongside our students and fighting with and for our students, really for things that they're really passionate about. You know, it could be anything from, you know, sports, or it could be something environmental, something they really want to, you know, create change for. It could be something in the school building that they want to see change. But we can't really get to the core of this, Tim, unless we build those connections and build a community around our students.
Yeah, we really emphasize that it's step at a time. You have to build the connection before you can do the community. Then you have to build the community before you can get to solidarity. You can't skip any of the circles on your journey into the core. So that brings us to our actual different strategies we're going to give you. So we're going to start with connection. How can we build connections with diverse students? And the first way that we recommend is becoming warm demanders.
Yeah, so this is a coin that an author, Zaretta Hammond, a term she really coined. So it really involves like both care and push from teachers, right? And teachers who are really competent in their instruction can also hold high standards as well as giving emotional support for students. So this allows students to really take those academic risks that we ask them to. But you know, it's a real delicate balance with care and push. So and this really interrupts the brain because it cultivates skills to push students into their zone while helping manage emotional response. So if we don't see a negative emotional response really if they have that connection with their teacher. If their teacher, they know they have that emotional support to fall back on.
Yeah, and when I think of warm demanders, for any of you out there that are parents, I think as parents, a lot of us naturally become warm demanders, right? We want our kids to work hard. We want our kids to do what's right, but we're warm with them along the way. We love them, we support them as we have these high expectations. That doesn't always happen in our relationships as educators. Sometimes we don't bring that same warmth. We don't bring that same level of expectation. So to really be warm demanders with our diverse students is really important to show them. And that's really related to the next one, which is emphasizing belonging and mattering. This word mattering, this comes from Bettina Love, and she's done some incredible work. And we'll show you one of her books at the end. She really changed my thinking on a lot of this work, really impacted both Vilenti and I. But we really need to make sure, we need to overemphasize with our diverse students that they belong and that they matter in our classrooms. It's like you can't just say it. You have to say it, you have to feel it, you have to say it 100 more times, you have to show it, you have to demonstrate it, and you have to do a million little things for them to finally feel like, I matter. I matter when I'm in this class or I'm with this teacher. And it's sort of like the foundation of it is sort of like unconditional love. And again, going back to being parents, like no matter how much our own kids mess up, we unconditionally love them and they know that, right? And that's what our diverse students need to feel in school. They need to feel our unconditional love so that they know that they matter. And their ideas matter, their opinions matter, their judgments matter. They matter way past their grades and achievement. I've had some student relationships along the way, and when I was a teacher especially, where I definitely made kids feel like they mattered when they were doing well. But then when they weren't doing well, I probably made them feel the opposite. And that I realize now was a mistake. So we really need to make students understand that they belong and they matter. And it's a year-long endeavor, but you have to really keep this as a focus.
Thanks for sharing that, Tim. And Kelly Christian's great. She's putting different resources in the chat, which is great. So understanding unconscious bias is really important, right? So it's to learn attitudes or stereotypes that exist in our subconscious mind that really impacts, the way we think and we act, especially with our students. And, we all have this, right? As educators, we all, have our own bias, right? And I think it's really important, Tim, that we don't ignore it, right? But we address it, head on. And because our students can feel it as well, right? And if we ignore it, our students suffer, right? So these unconscious bias, oftentimes can turn into different microaggressions in the classroom that our students feel, when it comes to, whether it's lowering our expectations for our diverse students, or it could be, over focusing on, behaviors and discipline for students of color. So, I think it's really important that we face it head on and not ignore it, Tim. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And we can't get rid of unconscious bias. We can work at getting rid of it, but it takes a long time. And I think the first and most important thing is to recognize it in ourselves. Recognize it when it happens. So as you said, Vilenti, you can stop its impact before the microaggression or before you behave the wrong way. So Vilenti, share your story from this weekend, because you caught yourself having unconscious bias this weekend. I think it's an interesting story to share.
Yeah, man. I was leaving I was in this a city, and I've never been there before, so I don't know anybody, right? And this guy comes up, to my car, and it's me and my son. We're leaving a AE tournament, and he looks like me. He's around my age, and he's by himself, and he's just approaching the car, and immediately I was like, you know, should I be worried? You know what I mean? Like, should I be? I had my guards up for a second, and then I had to check myself. I'm like, why did my thing? He just wanted to know like more about my car. Like, he just was asking about the features, like, and then we actually like ended up exchanging numbers because he's interested in getting a similar type of vehicle. But after I had to call Tim, like, man, like I just had this moment. But it is, at first I didn't want to admit those biases, but it's important that we do. So
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing is you caught it, right? Because it's gonna happen. That the point is feeling it, seeing it, and stopping it when it does. So another way to build connections with our diverse students is to build what we call asset-based connections. And this is really about seeing students through a lens of what they're good at, seeing students through a lens of what they excel at, what are they experts in, right? So often as teachers, it's easy to start to see kids and think about kids in the lens of what they can't do or what they're struggling with. And with our diverse students, who we need to form these deep connections with, we have to see them for all that they can do. That needs to be the framework in our minds. We need to understand their strengths. We need to lean into these strengths. We need to nurture these strengths, discuss these strengths. Whatever they're good at should be the forefront of our relationship with them. And then this becomes the foundation of our connection. And when the students see us and they, more importantly, like feel us experiencing them this way, that is when they really start to trust us. So when they know that we're looking at them through a positive lens, that is when the trust begins to form. And speaking of trust generators.
yeah, Tim, there's a number of different trust generators that we can utilize, right? Like there's selective vulnerability, there's familiarity, there's concern that we can have, like genuine concern for our students and with our students, and there's confidence. I do want to focus our attention on similarity of interest, which is a trust generator I often use, and just using like common ground with students, right? And figure out what we have in common. First things first, like I'm a big sports guy. Go Celtics, but a lot of our students are also, Jason Tatum fans or Celtics fans. So like having those conversations just to kind of break the ice at first, and then having those continuous connections around sports, or it can also be things that I want to learn more about. Like, if there's students in really interested in like animals, uh, things like that. I want to learn more about it. Can you teach me? So I think those trust generators, especially similarity of interest, can really like build a solid foundation with students.
Yeah, and I think that was a really good example, Valenti, because I've seen you in action with students. And sometimes when you're trying to get to know them and ask them what they're interested in, and they say something that you're not interested in, sometimes I'll be like, oh, how am I going to connect with this kid? And I've seen you respond the way you just said, which is, oh, can you teach me about that? And I've seen the kids just light up, and I don't even know if you really care to learn about it. I just know that you knew that was how you were going to lean in and build some trust with that student, and the kid gets excited, and next thing you know, you have a relationship forming. So great way to do it with that. Oh, can you teach me more about that? And that brings us to our last example here, which is demonstrating vulnerability. This is so important when we're making connections with all kids, but especially with diverse students. A lot of diverse students come to school with their guard up. Their guard is up, and they don't naturally or want to show vulnerability because again, they don't feel like school's for them necessarily. And therefore, unfortunately, a lot of times as educators, if anything goes wrong with that student, now we put our guard up, and now they came in with a wall, and now we're building a wall, and now they have to build their wall stronger, and we have to build our wall, And the exact opposite is true when we're making connections with diverse students. We need, as the adults, we need to demonstrate a lot of vulnerability. We need to be open with our students, discuss our own challenges, admit our shortcomings. Basically, we need to be human with them. If we want to form these deep connections, we need to be real. We need to keep it real with who we are, what our struggles are, what our strengths are as well, and show them this vulnerability. And I know, like, 20 years in schools, this isn't always easy for educators, right? Like we're supposed to be the all-knowing, we're supposed to be the teachers, we're supposed to be the ones guiding you, and we're supposed to model. And it's sort of like you have to change your mindset and be like, no, part of what I need to model more than anything else is vulnerability, and so let's say a student and I like have a bad interaction, and and I'm going to keep consequencing until the student stops. Like, no, like, of course, if the student did something wrong, there has to be a consequence, that's how it works. But then I have to admit some vulnerability and say, I know I could have done such and such a little bit better. I'm sorry about that, and that I could have done something better and I'm sorry, 2 sentences. And that kid's wall will start to go down so we can form these connections, or if the kid had a bad day and kind of acted out, the next day I could say something like, you were upset yesterday. And I totally understand that. I get upset and sometimes I lose like my way when I'm upset as well. So I get it. So little vulnerable quotes like this that help kids lower their walls so that we can form these connections. Because vulnerability really is a foundational piece of connection, and we as teachers need to model this. So that brings us to a question in the chat for you, which is, I'm sure a lot of you have done a lot of incredible things to form connections with kids. We've given you 6 ideas. There's 600 other ideas, obviously. So what are some ways you've had success connecting with diverse students? What are some ways you've had success connecting with diverse students? So Vilenti's going to be keeping an eye on your responses in the chat. And I just wanted to sort of share a story of my experience with this, which is when I was a middle school principal, one of the things I learned to do to connect with diverse students was to include them in problem solving that impacted them, right? So if I was in a room full of adults and we were trying to figure out how to make things better for our diverse students, it just started to dawn on me in the last few years. What are we doing? Why are we just talking about this as adults and like making educated guesses? So what I would start to do is, as soon as we identified the problem, I would go out and start to have conversations with the students we were trying to problem solve for. And whether it be one-to-one conversations with the kids, whether it be small groups, I pull them into the hallway or into the cafeteria, whatever it might be, I would start to go right to them and I'd be vulnerable. I'd say, listen, this is a problem and it impacts you. And a lot of adults are working on solving this problem, but we need to know what you think about how we should solve this problem. And I'll never forget the first time I did this. It was a bunch of 8th grade boys that I was talking to, and their eyes just lit up when they saw that I was asking them for help. And I hopefully think that they knew I was genuinely and authentically asking them for help. So just another way to connect with students is to bring them in on problem solving that might impact them. Anything cool there in the chat, Vilenti?
Yeah. So I see a lot of really authentic listening, Tim, and really being genuine about caring about what the students are telling us. You know, uh, Give them voice, and things like that. So yeah, some great feedback.
Yeah, and the authentic listening is a huge piece. It's almost like a segue here, Vilenti. It's almost like a segue. So thank you for your participation in the chat. So
Yeah.
brings us to the next circle in our coach-centric circles, which is community, right? And how do we build community? So we really break this down here into 2 strategies. I'm going to talk about the first one, and Vilenti's going to talk about the second one. But the first one is authentic listening. Now, to the people that were putting that in the chat, totally agree. When you're building one-on-one or small group connections, you have to authentically listen. But what we're talking about here in the community circle, when it comes to authentic listening, is this can be listening to one student, a bunch of students, or to the whole class of students, right? And this work comes from Cornelius Minor, who did some incredible writing and practice on this strategy. And huge shout out to him and the work he's done. We'll show you one of his books towards the end here as well. But how Minor defines authentic listening is there's 3 steps, okay? It's hear, think, plan. It's hear, think, plan. And a lot of this thinking could be that we have to go in order, and it could be from the whole class, right? So let's talk about here. We want to always be listening to what students are communicating. And this could be verbally or non-verbally, right? So if we're teaching a lesson and everybody looks bored, that's communication. As a teacher, we need to hear that, right? If certain students seem uncomfortable, that's communication. We need to hear that. If kids are telling us stuff, that's communication. We need to hear that, right? But then what happens often with teachers is, and administrators and counselors and just educators, right? And this is a good problem, is we want to help. We want to help. And so we hear something and we immediately want to fix it. We immediately want to improve it. We immediately want to help you get over it. You know, it's sort of like we have this inclination to immediately respond. And for this type of authentic listening, it's not that. We want to listen. And then we need to step away and we need to think about what we've been hearing. Think about what kids are telling us. Think about what it means. Think about where it comes from. Think about how we can connect to it, whatever it might be. So there's this, in this type of authentic listening, which we argue builds community. We listen to them, then we step away. We think about what we heard. And then after those two steps, we plan. Based on what we're hearing or what we heard, how do we change or improve our teaching? How do we change or improve our relationships? How do we change or improve our actions? How do we change or improve our curriculum, right? And it could go to any of those or any of another number of facets of school. But it's this real deliberate and sort of focused and patient process where we're constantly in this loop of listening to their verbal and nonverbal messages, thinking about what we're hearing, and then planning based on that to improve what we're doing. And if we do this type of authentic listening, we build a community around our diverse students, right? So we're responding to them, we're thinking about them, we're planning based on them, and therefore we're building a community around them. So authentic listening is one. And then the next one, which Vilenti will talk about, is building a third space.
Yeah, Tim. So we got to build a third space for our students. So what is the third space? So let's just think about it in this way. So our first space is our home, right? When we walk into our homes, you know, there's usually like different quotes on the wall, maybe scripture. There's pictures of your family, so that kind of makes that you know that first space for you. Our second space is work, right? When we arrive to work, we show up a different way. We show up. We speak. We may speak differently. We may dress differently according to your work. How you guys, you know, what you do for work, but and then our third space is wherever we can truly be ourselves and be social with others. So this could be a museum, it could be a sports facility, a bar, it could be a restaurant or a gym. But it's really anywhere you can go and be totally comfortable with just being yourselves and being authentic. Um, so you know, when we're creating this third space, Tim, we want to think about the aesthetics of our classroom or our school building, right? So it's important for us to, you know, do things like hang photos or artwork around the classroom that, you know, represent all the different cultures that your students bring. You know, or posting different artifacts that reflect the diverse cultures of your students. And one thing too is like just, you know, showing your students that you value them by keeping the classroom neat and well organized. Um, Another way to kind of build a third space is through routines and rituals. And we usually think about this as a classroom management tool, but routines create social bonds, uh, positive energy, and really a classroom and rituals should really ignite the spirits and emotions to reaffirm our students that they truly belong in that classroom. Just some ideas for different routines for culturally responsive teaching is using music while students are transitioning from one activity to another, or using parallel independent work where students are working independently, but they have the opportunity to, you know, speak or share with their partners and give feedback to each other. Just real quick, Tim, with the music piece, maybe like working with the students to create a playlist. Obviously, it's a playlist that, you know, school appropriate, but you know, letting them have a voice in that as well. And just different rituals. Maybe you can start the classroom or the class with you know, a inspiring TED talk. And it may relate to what you guys are working on that day. Uh, um, so, but it's just something inspiring to get like the classroom discussion going. And, lastly, I just want to discuss talk structures for culturally diverse students. Um, just to remember that a lot of culturally diverse students expect this in their social discourse, and that's like motion and activity, uh, and having like spirited debates with peers. In some cultures, we may be louder than other cultures, and so like when they're communicating back and forth, there may be some cooperative overlapping that goes on. But a lot of times we educators, when they hear loud noises, and that can kind of signal like disruption, but it's really just students just having great spirited debates about different things. So I think that's important for us to remember.
Yeah, and as a white educator, like I realize when I'm trying to build a third space in my classroom, if I'm not thinking about my diverse students deliberately when I'm trying to create the aesthetics and come up with routines and rituals and come up with different ways we're going to interact, if I'm not thinking about them and building around them, then I'm building the third space around myself, right? So I either have to really focus on them and how to do these things in a way that builds a community for them, or I'm default building it for me. And I think that's really important to remember. So, that a lot of you have built community, right? A lot of you have built community. And there's, again, a lot of ways to do this. We propose really listening and planning based on that, and really focusing on building a third space as two important parts of building community. But what has worked for you? What has worked for you when you're creating a classroom community for your diverse students? And Vilenti, maybe you could think back to when you were an elementary educator, right? Back in those days with the little ones. Did you have a move that really worked to build community with your students?
Yeah, Tim. So we had a group of students who really, they really struggled behaviorally, academically, and really socially. But they were like leaders. They were natural born leaders in our school. So, one thing we would do is I would gather these students because I had great, relationships with all of them. And we created this club that we called the Young Gentlemen. And so we would wear shirts and ties every Monday, and we would check in. We would have lunch together. We would meet after school at times, and so this was our way of building their own little community, and that turned out to be something great for them. They felt like a belonging. They would start to, they would greet different visitors and give them tours of the school. These were students that before they had this club, they were the highest. They had the highest number of referrals. Their attendance really struggled, and all of these areas improved for them because they had something they believed in. They felt like a part of like the school community in a positive way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And there's a lot of great stuff in the chat as well. I liked someone posted about posting some art, I believe, from Jamaica on the walls of the classroom. But I thought the most important thing was the educator mentioned also talking about that art often, right? So it's not something we put up in the beginning of the year and then it just is there, right? It's something that we go back to, we talk about. Another teacher or educator talked about students bringing in cultural things to decorate the classroom. And that's fantastic. I mean, talk about building a third space. If we let kids decorate our room, that's game changing in terms of community, right? And then someone was talking about bell ringer discussions, which is what we were talking about with those talk structures, right? Finding ways to use different talk structures to make sure every voice is valued. So again, thank you. Great stuff in the chat. And that brings us to our last circle. This is the core. This is, you have to build connection, you have to build community, then your goal becomes solidarity. So solidarity, what we mean by this is unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest. So when we get to solidarity, it's not just about teaching our diverse students or connecting with our diverse students. It's about fighting for and with our diverse students. So we join them. We join them, we become one with them, and we start to see the world through their lens, and we start to see the school day through their lens, and we really form this deep, deep relationship with them. So, one example of this is we can join forces with our diverse students to create and fight for social change that matters to them. So what do I mean by this? So what do your diverse kids want? How do they want the world to change? How do they want the school to change? What do they think could be better, right? Asking them this. Yeah.
Tim, I think this might be a good opportunity too to kind of revisit the word diversity and what this means in this
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah. So in this sense, diverse students, again, we do a lot of our focus on students of color, but this could be LGBTQ plus students. This could be students that are sort of in a marginalized population in wherever your school or community is. This is anybody that just brings a bunch of differences to the classroom relative to a lot of the other students. Does that summarize it, Vilenti?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when we join forces with them, again, we want to learn how they want to impact the world, and we want to learn why they want to do this. And then we want to help them do it. We want to be on their team as they do this work, right? So I have a good example of this from my last school, which is a bunch of students came forward and asked our assistant principal if they could form a pride club. And the assistant principal was very supportive and said, yes, absolutely. Just need to find an advisor. And they found a teacher. They found a teacher to be the advisor of the pride club. And the club formed, they started meeting weekly, the club grew, it clearly became a third space for these students, but then the teacher that was the facilitator or the advisor was a model of solidarity when he, after the students asked for it, he decided that they would march as a group in the huge local pride parade. And not only did they march in the local pride parade, but they led the local pride parade. They were the first ones in the parade. And I just think that was a great example of a teacher demonstrating solidarity with a diverse population in a school. That was going past connection, that was going past community, and that was working with and for those students on something that they were passionate about. So that's one way to do it. Vilenti, here's another way you can talk about.
Yeah, increasing diverse representation in our instruction, in curriculum, or even like if you have a library in our book, just having representation of all cultures. One thing, Tim, that I'm really passionate about is while I love Black History Month, I think we should celebrate Black history throughout the year. I think including more of what Black history is in our curriculum is important, right? But not just that, for all different cultures. Not just waiting for that month or for that celebration time to come up, but incorporating it throughout the entire year is really be beneficial for all.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And it's something I never got good enough at that as a public school educator. And I'm trying to be better at that in my role as a professor now. So one more we want to touch upon is joy and understanding what joy means to our diverse students. So again, whatever the population of the school is, there's going to be diversity within that population. And we want to learn what joy means to those students. What does joy mean? And what does it look like? And what does it feel like? And, there's a lot of research and a lot of literature now, which is really focused on Black joy in America and Black Americans reclaiming what joy is to them and what it means and how it means both overcoming, but not just overcoming. It also means having broad, expansive futures and celebrating and celebrating how far we've come or how far they've come and how far they're going. And, it's this whole concept. And that is just a microcosm of let's figure out what joy means to our students, right? And then let's celebrate that joy. So again, if I know what joy means to me, and it's easy for me to create that joy in my classroom, but that might not be what joy looks like or feels like or sounds like to some of my students. So I need to learn what joy is for them and then create that in the classroom. So solidarity, it's hard. And it's different. It's different. frankly, a lot of schools that do really well at just connection, that's phenomenal. That's a great start. If you get connection and then you're building communities around all your different students, that's incredible as well. But taking that next step towards solidarity is the way to completely solidify the relationships you have with potentially marginalized students. And that is why we push the educators we work with in our different workshops or different trainings, we push them to think about this and to think about how they can join forces with these students. So that brings us back to our circles. Vilenti keeps referencing them, and we just wanted to sort of circle back. How do you like that?
There you go. There you go.
Just wanted to circle back and just remind you that you really have to work on connection to get to community, and then community to get to solidarity. And, you know, working on all three is a wonderful way to really change how students feel at school, And when they feel good, they can learn and they can flourish.
Tim, it's really hard to get to join forces with students in solidarity if we don't really have that connection with them.
Yeah.
Or if they don't see themselves inside your classroom or feel like they, have that community around them. So
yeah, and you can just kind of picture it, right? As an educator, like if I didn't have any connection with these three types of students, but then I acted like we were going to take on this big social change project together, like they would probably look at me like, what is he talking about? Like, I'm not doing that, right? But if I had the connection, they would probably be like, oh, this sounds awesome, and let's do this. And then they could lead me. So you're right, you have to go in order. So we've thrown a lot at you. We wanted to share some resources to make sure you knew where to go for some of this. So I know that Kelly, thank you, has been putting a lot in the chat along the way. But a couple books here across the top that have really impacted a lot of what you just saw. And then down the bottom, obviously, New England League of Middle Schools. You can find our website. I'm on our website there. If you want to reach out to me, it has my email, Academic Leadership Association, Vilenti's organization. If you Google that, you will find his website and you will find Vilenti. And then I also do a podcast called the Teacher's Cup of Coffee podcast. You can hear that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do podcasts. Touch upon a lot of these different issues, as well as just, everyday, normal, day-to-day instructional engagement issues as well. So with that all said, are we ready to start taking some questions, Vilenti?
Do it.
All right. So we brought one question forward from before this workshop. So we're going to start with that. So I'm going to pose this to Vilenti. Someone sent this in. I thought it was a good one. How can we build relationships with families of diverse cultures to show students we care about knowing them as the whole person? So Vilenti, what have you done? What's the work you recommend to build relationships with families of diverse cultures?
Tim, I honestly think it's the same idea when you think about the circles, right? Like really building connection with students. I mean, or parents. Parents don't always want to just hear about their students when they're acting up in class, or they need your support, or they're in trouble, right? They want to feel like they have a true connection with you, as well as like opening up your classroom to them. And that's where you talk about the community piece and inviting them in into what's really happening, what's going on in your school building or your classroom. And then from there, you work in solidarity to best support that student, right? But it starts with like just simply connecting with them, giving them updates on what's going on in the class in a positive way, right? And there's also, Tim, we talked about, being vulnerable. But like if you are having challenges, like, hey, your child the best out of anyone. Like, how can we work together in solidarity? There's that word again, but like, how can we work together, so we can best support the student and get the best out of it for her?
Yeah, I think that vulnerability, I had a million tough phone conversations with parents in 17 years as an administrator, right? And the whole tenor of the conversation would change when I would sort of say, what would you do? What do you think we should do?
Yeah.
And there's a Bonnie in the chat that just posted about calling when you have good news. And Vilenti, you said that as well. And that's just so true. That's just so true. Like if every educator gave 7 minutes a day to reaching out to parents with good news, a lot of family school relationships would change pretty quickly. Jeff, Kelly, are there other questions from the Q&A that we could address before we have to sign off?
So I know we just have a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing specific resources. And I see a few people in the chat, Jayadi, Genevieve, have shared some resources as well. All of you joining us, if you have any recommendations for resources, please go ahead and share in the chat as well with your peers, in addition to what Vilenti and Tim have shared. Jeff, do you want to lead off with a question, and then I can ask one before we go to closing?
Sure. I'll just start off, having been in education for many, many years, is like, I would assume that, like, personally, that I recognize our students' culture, diversity, but like, how do we actually recognize our own biases?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is something that takes a long time, right? So number one, read about unconscious bias. Like, you can't just hear it for 2 minutes and understand it, right? So read about it, learn about it, watch TED Talks about it, like really dive into what is this? And then you'll start to understand how it impacts you. Number two, look for physiological responses. Vilenti's brain didn't say, you are having unconscious bias against this gentleman approaching your car, right? Like, it was a feeling he had, right? And because he thinks and reads and learns about this so often, he immediately could identify, I'm having a feeling that has no concrete reason. So start to look for those physiological responses. And there is a cool thing Harvard and a bunch of other universities did. You can look it up online. It's an unconscious bias test you do online, and it's a funny test. It's when you're taking it, you'll probably be like, does this work? But a lot of universities partnered on it, and you can learn about whether this test tells you have unconscious bias in a bunch of different ways. And it's free. It's free for anyone online. You can do it today.
Yeah, I think the point with that, Tim, is we all have it.
You
know what I mean? So we try so hard to steer in a certain way. It's because we have those biases. So
and I want to point out what Deirdre just said, because that's so important. Is spend time with people whose identities are different than yours, right? So that's one thing that, as far as overcoming it, you need, if you identify some of it, you need to spend more and more time with other types of people to overcome it.
And I'm sorry we don't have more time for questions. An hour always goes so quickly. Tim and Vilenti, this was really great. If we could kind of give a closing thought to everyone. So hopefully everyone ingested and internalized every moment of the 60 minutes together. But if you were to leave people with one key piece of advice or one entry point, what would you say?
I'll go first. I just think it's really important as educators to keep this work at the front of the line, right? So like, the next paper you have to grade goes to the front of the line. The next thing you have to turn into your principal goes to the front of the line. Like, so many tasks come forward every day. So somehow you have to keep this work at the front of the line. How do we stay focused on connection, community, and solidarity? And whether you have to post it on your wall, or whether every morning you sort of have a reminder you read, but you have to keep this at the front of the line in order to impact these students.
Vilenti, do you have a closing thought?
Yeah, I think Tim, the nail on the head, but especially around this time of the year, we always get like, it's late in the year, we're all exhausted. Don't take those good relationships you have for granted. And continue to work and be vulnerable with the students you haven't connected with. I think that's important. So, but above all, we want to get to the point where we're working in solidarity with our students. We're fighting with and for our kiddos, and families.
Thanks again. Thanks to all of you and to our panelists, to Jeff, Tim, and Vilenti, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for having us, Kelly.
Thank you. Take care.